So don't look now, but the stock market is selling off software as a service stocks, and they're saying it's due to AI. What the hell is going on? Let's talk about it. So welcome to Dave Linthicum is Not AI. I'm Dave, an AI SME and an AI skeptic, looking at AI with a balanced perspective. Let's get started. So I'm going to post this video out of sequence. I was actually going to make this and post it in April, middle of April sometime. But obviously it's a more timely topic. I did get a lot of calls last week from reporters about it, and I gave my 2 cents on what it was. And I also heard from you guys that you wanted to know what was going on in terms of the sell-off in software as a service stocks, which were made around a paper that was published in terms of AI reducing the revenue. And let's kind of break it down because there is some truth here, but also there's some exaggeration here as normal. So the idea is that you sell software as a service systems to enterprises via the seats. In other words, you have 50 users, that's 50 seats. You have 100 users, 100 seats, and different tiers of, services that you get, via those seats. Salesforce does it, all the other software as a service providers. And by the way, there's a way more than you think, and it's a larger part of the cloud market than you think. And that's fairly a good profitable model for them. Obviously, there's not a lot of cost of goods sold. They're selling a service, so they're not shipping software, supporting software on some remote server that's at the customer site. They just sell seats. It's almost like printing money, and that's why the software as a service market kind of emerged before the infrastructure as a service market, 20, 30 years ago, because everybody saw the value in doing it. And I, in my career, I focused on software as a service as early as in the 90s, and the ability to provide integration services and application services. I just saw the utility in it. Instead of me replicating, a platform, on each of the customer sites, meaning thousands and thousands of platforms, I'm able to sell this as a cloud service. In other words, a common service that people can use on demand. And it seemed like it would make more sense, which it did. And obviously, it's the primary way people are consuming software these days. So the argument that's being made is that if we're moving to AI and we're moving to AI agents, then the agents will access the software as a service system rather than the humans. And therefore, we're going to need fewer licenses because we can have a single agent, which is actually working with multiple humans, many, many humans, that will be using the SaaS system. And therefore, instead of selling 40 licenses or 40 seats, they're going to sell 4 seats. And that's the logic here. So I have some visual aids. I'm going to go ahead and put them up on the screen now. And this is what it's going to look like, before software as a service is leveraged through AI agentic-based systems. And we'll move to, what it looks like after agentic AI. And obviously you can see there's fewer connections and therefore fewer licenses are going to be needed. Is this real? Yeah. It's called aggregation. It's been around for a long period of time. And in many instances it's used today. We're using systems. It doesn't necessarily have to be AI agents that's able to access the back-end data and certainly software as a service systems, using their APIs. And we're doing so for important reasons. We need to get the single source of truth in terms of what a customer is, inventory, all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very important that we're able to do this. Now, does it fundamentally change the way software as a service systems are sold? Well, if everybody uses agents, it does, because obviously they're going to use the agents as aggregators, and we should, at least the way the logic goes, end up having to buy fewer licenses, which is going to reduce the revenue of the software as a service system. And so that logic got around pretty quick. And last week, the whole, software as a service stocks just went down like crazy, with kind of panic selling. And, that got the calls from the reporters and analysts and other folks that were looking for quotes around it. And looking at the problem, this is a fairly simple thing that we're considering, and it's pretty easy to predict where this is going to go. So the core assertion here is that the point solution features get commoditized as agents can stitch together similar capabilities across tools, which makes individual apps feel interchangeable. Yeah, I think it is going to have that effect. In other words, and by the way, it's not just AI agents. This drives me nuts. People think they just invented this stuff. I'm able to take systems of software and put them between the humans that are consuming the application, in this case, my application that I produced, and the backend SaaS systems that are going to serve as behavior and data for that particular application. So in other words, when I need the behavior, I need to figure out, tax calculations, logistics issues, things like that. I can call the API on the software as a service system, things like Salesforce. Or if I need the information, I can basically pull the information directly from the software as a service system as well, where it's basically functioning as a database. So that kind of architecture, this tiered architecture, has been around for a while. And it makes sense that if people are going to stand up agents, that's going to be the preferred mechanism to communicate with these software as a service systems. And it's fine. And obviously, I think there is going to be an effect on the revenue with the SaaS systems in terms of people moving to this architecture. The question is, which nobody seems to be asking, how fast do they think how fast do they think this is going to happen? It's going to be slow. Obviously, you have to change lots of things. You're changing your infrastructure. You're changing how people are accessing their applications. The user interfaces are changing. Instead of using the user interface that's provided by the software as a service provider, you're instead providing your own user interface, which is provided by the agent. And also the agents are going to carry out a lot of the core functionality instead of the back-end software as a service system, which you can do with any other technologies, by the way. It doesn't necessarily have to be an AI agent. And that's going to be a fundamental change that's very difficult to deploy, test, secure, govern, and get it out into production. And I think people are kind of missing that. So in other words, yeah, this is possible. Yeah, I can kind of see the logic where we can use aggregation. It's been around for a long period of time. You're just talking about using AI agents as aggregators now and reducing the need for the back-end systems. And by the way, this is true for databases on demand. This is true for any kind of an API system that's on demand, things like that. You're able to access it using a mechanism that you control, which is going to be able to funnel those accessibility requests, through a single channel, rather than multiple channels, which the software as a service systems are forcing you into now. So that's all it is. And now if the question is, and certainly the question that I was getting last week, or well, how long will it take for this to happen? Years. It's going to take years for this to happen. Enterprises can't move that fast because they have existing systems. This is going to require us making major changes to many of the enterprise applications that we have running now, moving away from the software as a service system, which many enterprises are dependent on, retraining, retesting, resecuring, to get this new, aggregated architecture up and running. Whether it's AI agents or just common software systems, it's kind of all the same. Now, even though we have great tools and we can certainly use AI to make build many of these capabilities, and now we have, better capabilities to move some of these common behaviors, into agents or into transactional systems, and the ability to access data, using, an aggregator kind of facility. They're not going to get there anytime soon. And that should be kind of the core message that's out there. I would say something we're going to actually see as a change in the marketplace is going to occur at best 3 to 5 years out. And it's going to roll out in very slow incremental ways. It's not going to be this, we're going to wake up on Tuesday and suddenly the software as a service systems are going bankrupt because everybody moved to some sort of an aggregator architecture, in this case, AI agents, because enterprises are going to have to take their time. They're going to have to pay for it. That's the big issue now. A lot of this stuff is going to cost millions of dollars to deploy and make changes within their IT infrastructure. And we're not going to see any drastic changes anytime soon. So spend consolidates into a platform layer, the suite, the agent orchestrator, which is basically, leveraging the APIs of the software as a service system, as we mentioned earlier, to get at behaviors and as well as data. And this is going to push many SaaS products down, to a back-end API role. And that's not a bad idea. I've always, touted the fact, I didn't like the fact that we were passing off the interfaces to our users, to the humans, with some other system that we don't own. In other words, they're going to make changes to the system. We're going to be dependent on them. We're going to be training our people on how to use those sorts of things. I would much rather, if I had my druthers, have a common system that I build and control, and then accessing the backend behaviors and data. In this case, within a software as a service system, it could be it could be a database, whatever, using a common mechanism. And, therefore it's going to put me in control. In other words, I'm not going to be dependent on the backend system. Indeed, if I need to, I can swap out the software as a service systems and just remap the APIs into another software as a service offering, remap the APIs in terms of how it's getting the data, and I'm going to have the same functionality, and the users don't even know that the change occurred. So I can be using one SaaS system one day and another SaaS system the other day, and I'm able to change them through a configuration. So pricing power shifts from per seat to usage outcomes, often lowering per vendor revenue unless software as a service systems owns the system of record or some sort of unique data flow or workflow or some sort of, proprietary differentiator out there. And in many cases, they do. Software as a service systems, we use them because they provide business processes that we're able to use as a service versus replicating ourselves, and we become dependent on those processes. So if we're unwilling or don't have enough money to replicate them in our own systems and our AI agents in this case, then we're going to be stuck with it, at least for the time being. And I think that's okay. They're not overly expensive or overly onerous, when you look at them, but, eventually we're putting them into a domain and we're taking back control of the applications that access them. And that's going to put us in a much better position. I think that's kind of the core theme of this. In other words, I think it's good that people are moving to this architecture. I've been, promoting this for the last 20 years, and certainly as software as a service kind of rose up. It probably will affect the software as a service providers out there and their ability to access revenue. I think they're going to change their models, by the way. I think if they're moving to per seat pricing, to usage-based pricing, whatever is going to make them even or even increase their revenues, I think we're seeing those changes coming. But it's not a panic time, either for the software as a service providers or for the enterprises, because nothing's going to be changed anytime soon. So what does this mean for the enterprises? First, don't panic. We're not there yet, and it's a long way off. I know I'm fairly skeptical around the adoption of agentic-based AI and the use of AI agents, but the data is bearing that out as well. Stated that 2 years ago when it first kind of kicked off. Enterprises are not moving that fast to agentic-based AI deployments in general. Because of the cost of doing so and the number of changes that have to occur. We're talking a lot about it, and lots of things are, dominating the tech press now. OpenClaw, for example, in the agentic AI world, things like that. But the ability to move to that architecture and move to what we're talking about as the target state is going to take many years for most enterprises. I'm sure some enterprises can pull it off, faster than others because they have access to resources or they've done a good job in, architecting their enterprise. But the majority of enterprises out there are going to make a slow slog, toward this new architecture, which is going to leverage software as a service systems differently because of leveraging AI agents. And we're going to see some of that, start to emerge at some point, not anytime soon, or they're using some sort of other aggregator. Remember, that's going to be a possibility as well. You don't necessarily need to force fit AI agents as a aggregator to the back end, SaaS services and SaaS data. You can use, any number of mechanisms and software development tech tools that we have out there today to build an application that's able to basically serve that role. Well, anyway, let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree with me or not, or you think this is going to be something that moves much faster, or this is something that's going to move like it has for the last 30 years, kind of at the speed, of the ability for the enterprises to spend money and how fast they can move. Don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other videos on this channel. Also check out my InfoWorld Cloud Computing blog, my 100+ LinkedIn learning courses, and of course my generative AI architecture course out on Go Cloud Careers. And finally, my latest books, Unlocking the Power of Cloud and An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing. Finally, check out my other YouTube channel, The Cloud Computing Insider. The link is in the description. So until next week, stay very, very safe. The magical YouTube algorithm thinks this is another one of my videos that you should watch next. Take care, guys.